Tonight at the Active Travel Cafe, we have delighted to be joined by Stephen Edwards, who's the Chief Executive of Living Streets, the national walking charity. Really interested to hear what Stephen has got to say about how he sees things, Living Streets priorities, where he sees active travel, and also talking about the Walking and Cycling Alliance and its role in lobbying and tackling some of the issues that we're facing at the moment. And we're also joined tonight by Carolyn Axtell from the campaigning charity Possible. And Carolyn's going to share some insights on a campaign that they've run in Tooting, a car-free campaign. So two great speakers tonight, but we will start as ever with our usual roundup of any crowdsourced news or tips or questions that people would like to share from around the country. So over to the floor, and if anyone has anything to share, please raise your hand or post in the chat and I'll come to you. Robin from Oxford.
Always got something to share. So we have new bollards. We love a new bollard. Can I show you a picture of our new bollards?
Yeah, I think you should be able to. Thanks for asking.
Share screen. Yes, I've got two things to show you actually. One is if you remember, we had so this is East Oxford, and the old bollards, which were plasticky things, got ripped out, and now we have these nice sturdy wooden ones. So the first few that were put in, and they got nudged over while the cement that they're bedded into was, or maybe it was the tarmac, but it was still soft. So some of the naughty drivers found that they could nudge them over. So our local service company, ODS, it's a kind of owned by the Oxford City Council, found if they installed the tarmac and then they actually put the base for the bollard in and put a little bit of tarmac in there to cover it over, let it all go set, then they dug that bit of tarmac and put the bollard in a couple of days later, nice and solid. So all good at the moment.
Brilliant. The new car proof bollards, brilliant. Better keep moving on quick.
And then I just wanted to show this as a good example. Sorry to take up two. So this is I think very good practice, segregated actually in Bicester. So footway, cycleway, obviously roadway, and a little grass verge there. So there's probably lots of people who quite fancy a picture of something that's actually that good. So I will stick that in the chat with a Cambridge curb between the two. There's LTM 120, I'm sure everyone knows, says have something that's tactile in the middle, so that people visually impaired can tell there's a difference between the cycleway and the footway. Thank you.
Thanks, Robin. I'm sure there'll be some chat about people's views on whether how freshly rolled that tarmac is. Anyone else like to share some news or views or
those curbs?
Max.
We like a good curb. Bollards and curbs.
Max, over to you.
Hi, thank you. It's nothing to do with Brighton and Hove, unfortunately. It's a place where I used to live, though. I don't know if anybody is here from Chester, but I see that just today, through crowdfunding, 80 Active Travel Chester has raised £25,000 through crowdfunding. They've just hit their target today to have an active travel festival, and so £25,000 I guess can go a long way in a festival. So they're doing that in June, a festival in Chester through crowdfunding, 25,000, which is great news. I'll put a couple of links in the chat for you.
Wow, that is interesting. Not too far from Manchester where I am, so I'd definitely like to check that out. And seen in the chat, Sally, you're posting about something in Weybridge. Would you like to share that, or are you happy with that in the chat? Oh, Sally, if you just pop yourself off mute.
Sorry. Yeah, very quickly. Living in Surrey, they've got a transport strategy that says they want to increase active travel, and they have approved, the councillors, the transport team have approved, not the councillors, the transport team have approved this enormous distribution centre very close to our town. So it seems to make no sense at all, because and the basis is that the modelling says that the vehicles are about the same. The number of vehicles are about the same as as the business park that it was before, but because they're HGVs and parcel vans, they're obviously going to be very people are not going to want to start cycling with all this traffic whizzing around. So I don't know if anybody's got any advice, but the meeting is tomorrow, so there's not much time. We have written to the Director of Public Health for Surrey on the grounds that we don't think the health aspects have been properly evaluated, and we're quoting Chris Whitty and his report to say that they really shouldn't be dismissing active travel in this way.
Brilliant. Well, yeah, that sounds like you've got one on your hands there, Sally. And this Active Travel Cafe is a great place to share issues in order to see if other people can help. So it's always good to ask those questions in this part of the session. So yeah, if anyone's got any suggestions for Sally, do put them in the chat. Roxanne, over to you.
Hi everyone. Two pieces of news from Cambridge. I've been in meetings all day, so I haven't had time to dig into this, but a petition presented to our county council to go to a referendum about the proposals for a road user charge or a congestion charge. It did not pass at the county council. So that's just a little bit of slightly positive news towards investment in active travel. The other piece of news is more related to CamCycle, Cambridge Cycling Campaign. We were successful in our application to the Big Give for the Green Match Fund. We received £10,000, which will be used to match donations during the Green Match Fund period, which is coming up in April. But I'm just sharing that because a lot of people ask, where does CamCycle get its money from, etc. And this is quite exciting because we've been working with the Big Give for a number of years, but this is the largest amount of money we've ever received. So I hope that is indicating a trend towards more funding for campaigning, particularly around transport. So two pieces of nice news from Cambridge today.
Thanks, Roxanne. And yeah, that's money. One of the things, CamCycle's a charity, isn't it? So it's able to access funds. It's a bit of a process to go through, but can be really beneficial. Tim, over to you, Leicester.
Hi everybody. It's the second annual Leicester Cycling Awards on Friday night, and I get to present too. But one of the interesting things for me is that the most popular category for people putting forward were community cycling groups, and we had 7 nominees from 7 different groups, which says that, I think that says it's quite healthy here in Leicester. And just those last 2 comments about festivals and grants. I do a lot of work with community groups, and not about cycling usually, but Awards for All is the easiest way to get 10 grand. And they are currently really pushing community festivals. So if you have a look on the Awards for All site, I'll find the link, put it in the chat. They're wanting to bring the community together, and that might be about Windrush, that might be about the coronation, that might be about Eurovision, but it could also be about active travel, couldn't it? So there you go. I'll put it in the chat.
Thanks, Tim. And thanks for the bollard picture in the chat, Robin. Over to you, Don.
Hi.
Hi.
We've got the Transpennine Trail, obviously running from Southport through Liverpool out across to Hull and beyond. And one of the celebrations at the moment is the access points all along the loop line, which forms part of this cross-country route, are being revised. So it's good news for mobility scooters, tourists with adapted bikes or tandems. So access will be 100 times better. So we're really pleased about that. And we've also had upgrades along the route as well to combat tree damage and such like. But it's such a popular route, and hopefully Tim's just mentioned Eurovision, so we might sort of follow that, pick that up, that idea up, see what we can do, because we've got a few things planned. That's it from Merseyside.
Thanks, Don. And then Adam's based down in the West Country.
Yeah, just a quick one. I noticed that Wiltshire published their ATF4 bids publicly. So they put out very high level information, which implies that if your council hasn't, and you're interested, probably an FOI bid will get it quicker than anything else, just so you're aware.
What, so you mean if people want to see what bids went in, that information's
stick an FOI in to your council or your highways authority and ask to see them, or ask them directly, and if they don't come back, then do an FOI. Either way, within 2 to 3 weeks you should have your answer.
Two acronyms there for anyone who's not aware: Active Travel Fund for ATF4 and Freedom of Information, a very much loved tool of campaigners, although sometimes the advice is to ask politely first, and then if they refuse, use the FOI. Simon.
I was just gonna, I had a sudden thought there. It's not a bit of news, but it's just a very sudden thought that should we do a session on how to use FOIs really well? Because it is quite a craft and an art to it. I'm rubbish at it, frankly, still, so nowhere near good enough, but someone will be really good at this stuff. There are some folks around who are really good at doing FOIs.
I think that's a really good shout. Having partially sat in on something like that, there is an art to it, because if you ask too much, you probably won't get an answer, and if you ask too little, you might waste the opportunity. So make a note of that, Simon. And if anyone's got any suggestions on anyone you know who knows that the FOI system inside out, do suggest on email, activetravelcafe@gmail.com. H in Glasgow, let's make this the last one, and then we'll probably move into our speaker session.
Yeah, thanks. I see Ruth had a reaction to it as well. When I had a hit and run, there were 10 First Glasgow buses in the area, and I secured the CCTV and got it confirmed. But when the police went to collect the CCTV, they were told that I had secured it and they couldn't have it. And then recently I had a close pass by a bus driver, another First Glasgow bus driver, and I immediately got on and said, can we get the CCTV? Because your driver refused to comply with the conduct regulations and give me his details. And they said, only if the police come to us with a complaint. So it feels almost catch-22. You know, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. How can you get hold of CCTV, which virtually every bus on the street has these days, to cover any traffic incidents? And it spreads across enforcement, driving on footways, blocking, obstructing traffic, foot traffic on footways and such like. They aren't enforced. And we're having ANPR for the low emission zones coming in. That's going to capture one hell of a lot of vanity plate drivers who corrupt their registration plates to spell names.
Okay, thanks H. Yeah, so good question in the chat and emphasised by H there. Does anyone know how we can get hold of CCTV from buses? On the ANPR cameras, another acronym, automatic number plate recognition cameras, I know in Manchester, where they were put in for the clean air zone, which is now on pause, the police did just put out a press release saying that they've actually been using them successfully for helping fight crime. So they clearly are being used, even though our clean air zone isn't actually operational. So that's interesting. Do carry on chatting about any of those issues in the chat, and please share any information if you can. I've made a note of that suggestion, those two suggestions. That's brilliant. Okay, I think we'll move into the speaker part of the session now, and delighted to welcome Stephen Edwards from Living Streets. It's Living Streets' big conference this week, so I'm glad he's been able to find the time to join us in advance of that. And Stephen's going to just share with us some thoughts on where things are at the moment. And over to you, Stephen.
Hi, and great to see everyone. Really good to see so many familiar faces on the call as well, and great to see another Stephen Edwards in the list as well, which has happened before actually, but good to see you there. I'm going to get my excuses in at the outset. I've got quite a bad cough and cold, so if I launch into a coughing fit mid-sentence, please do excuse me, and I'll be back again afterwards. I'm going to talk about three things this evening, and then hopefully we'll have some time for questions as well. I'm going to talk first of all about some of our current priorities and activities at Living Streets. Then I'm going to talk about active travel, particularly walking, and our thoughts on the state of walking in the UK at the moment, what's going well, what's not going so well. And then thirdly, just talk a little bit about the recent announcement from DFT on funding for active travel, our thoughts on that and what we're doing about that, both as Living Streets and as a member of the Walking and Cycling Alliance as well. Excuse any noise in the background, my kids are very loudly playing a game, so let's hope they don't disturb us too much and disturb my bandwidth. So first of all, hopefully many of you already know Living Streets. Living Streets is the UK charity for everyday walking. We were founded in 1929 as the Pedestrians Association, and our roots then were very much in campaigning. So we campaigned for the first highway code, the first zebra crossings in the UK, the first driving tests, many of the things we now take for granted, and we continue with a lot of that campaigning work to this very day. And I see Roger Geffen on the call. It was great to be involved in a campaign on the highway code only a couple of years ago, which resulted in a number of far-reaching changes to the highway code, both for walking and cycling. It was great to be working in partnership with Cycling UK and others on that. Aside from the campaign work we still do, we also do a lot of delivery work with local authorities, and we do a lot of behaviour change work to get children walking to school, more people walking in their local communities, and more people walking as part of their kind of walking day. So lots and lots of different things, and I'd be happy to touch on that later on in the meeting, but I'm not going to go into huge detail on it right now. I think the three things I want to focus on as current priorities for Living Streets. First of all, what are the barriers to walking and how do we address them? Secondly, what can we do to improve the evidence base, particularly around walking, but also around cycling as well? And then thirdly, what are some of the more difficult political choices we need to make to shift the dial, and what are we doing on those? Just to start off on barriers to walking, I think just to understand the barriers, the latest National Attitude Survey from last year is a great place to start. One of the questions in that was, what are the barriers you as an individual face to walking on a day-to-day basis? And the top things that jumped out were well-maintained pavements. Sort of huge 74% said that was an issue. Secondly, safer roads. Thirdly, safer crossing points. And then fourthly, better provision for health needs. So things like benches, public toilets, those kind of things that really make a difference for a lot of people. These are all things that we are working on a day-to-day basis to address as Living Streets. And just to point out a couple of things that we've done recently on pavements, we believe that the quality of our pavements is absolutely essential. We talk a lot about potholes on roads and the impact they have on drivers, and of course the impact they have on cyclists as well. We don't talk enough about the quality of our pavements. And even more concerningly, we don't know enough about the state of our pavements across the country as well. We've started the work of closing this gap by undertaking some dedicated research this year into trips and falls on our pavements. And that's found that pedestrian falls are currently costing taxpayers around £0.5 billion a year. And there's a particular challenge for older adults. And the research we've conducted using a combination of NHS data and a literature review and kind of some on-street surveys we've done ourselves shows that around a third of the people over the age of 65 and around half of the people age 80 and over fall at least once a year. And that means there could be around 1 million outdoor falls in England alone for older adults. Now, that has a massive impact on people. Though people that fall are often scared to leave their homes afterwards and are isolated as a result. And that has an impact on mental health and physical health in the longer term as well. So this is not a small issue. It's a massive issue that needs to be addressed. And having a good evidence base is a start, but then ensuring that we're putting funding towards repairing our pavements as well as maintaining our roads is absolutely critical as part of that. And if you want to read that research, that is available on our website. Second point I wanted to talk about this evening was safer crossing points. And this has been a big campaign focus for Living Streets for many years. And we have done another big campaign on it this year, which many of you may have seen. There's a couple of key things that we really want to see. One is less time to wait at crossings. Observations we have done as kind of some of our research in London and elsewhere has shown that if someone has to wait for longer than 30 seconds at a crossing, they will just cross anyway and put themselves at risk as a result. The answer is not is prioritizing people over cars and ensuring that our crossings are timed appropriately to ensure that people can cross the road in a timely fashion. But it's about much more than that. It's also about ensuring that when crossings do change, people have sufficient clearance time. The assumptions that our crossings work on were calculated in the 1950s and haven't changed since. Crossings assume a walking speed of 1.2 meters a second, which isn't enough for many older people. And then the third thing that we need to look at is the placement and design of our crossings. Have we got enough crossings that are accessible and well placed? But also, what are we doing to consider other types of crossings that aren't allowed in the UK at the moment? And a big focus for us is side road zebras and what more we can do to build the evidence base around side road zebras and then ensure their introduction in the longer term as well. So that's crossings. Thirdly, just to talk about safer roads, the biggest issue here is one that we are all far too familiar with, which is the speed and volume of vehicles. And we have been campaigning for many years again to ensure the introduction of a kind of blanket 25 mile per hour speed limit in built-up areas across the country. It's great to see progress in Wales, discouraging not to see any progress in England. And likewise, we've been campaigning for many years for a nationwide ban on pavement parking. Fantastic to see slow progress being made in Scotland and some progress being made in Wales. Absolutely unacceptable that there has been such a long wait for progress in England. Consultation closed. The Department for Transport's consultation on pavement parking closed in September 2021, and we've been waiting ever since for a response. I'm not encouraged that a nationwide ban is on the cards at the moment, but we need to all continue pushing for that as something that is absolutely essential to protecting the quality of our pavements, but also making our streets more accessible for everyone. And then finally, difficult decisions. I mentioned car, and the problem here ultimately is the same for walking and cycling. It's too many cars traveling too quickly on our roads. And I've talked a lot about what we can do to enable more walking and some of the work that Living Streets does through its behaviour change projects to get more people walking. That's the carrot. I think the thing we really need to also think about though is the sticks and what more we can do to discourage people from driving altogether. And road charging is an essential part of that. And the work that we are doing, I see Roger Geffen again, through the Low Traffic Future Alliance that Roger's leading, is absolutely essential in that regard, and we're committed to continuing to push forward on that. Moving on to the second point, just around active travel and walking and conditions for change. I think our starting point really has to be the second cycling walking investment strategy published last year and the targets we have in there. I won't reiterate those targets because I think everyone on the call knows those targets and knows the amount of money that CWIS 2 spoke about as being available for walking and cycling in the UK. That really set out the foundations for an ambitious programme for walking and cycling. And, you know, I don't want to be all negative about the way things are moving at the moment, because there's some positive progress. The creation of Active Travel England is fundamentally a good thing. And I note it is very much about walking and cycling. Secondly, I think just sticking on the ATE point, it is fantastic that ATE's position as a statutory consultee in planning decisions has been safeguarded, because there were some moves to retreat on that within government in the last 6 to 12 months, and it's good that that is still there and will ensure that many of the mistakes that have been made with new developments in particular will not be repeated in the future. I think the kind of big elephant in the room, though, has to be funding and money, because all of this stuff costs money. And the money that needs to be invested in walking and cycling, if we're to achieve the targets in the cycling and walking investment strategy, is a fraction of the amount we need to spend that we currently spend on our highway network. And you'll all have seen, I'm sure you've discussed it in previous meetings, the announcement that the government snuck out on active travel funding 2 weeks ago in a wider statement on HS2 funding and highway funding. It basically slashed the capital funding for active travel for the rest of this parliament, so up to 2025, from 308 million to 100 million. This will see England significantly lagging behind other parts of the UK. So spending per head in England will be around £1 compared to £8.90 in London under the kind of funding settlement. Last year, £19 in Wales and £50 in Scotland. Note, this is just capital funding, and revenue funding is still under discussion, although I would expect some efficiencies to be made there as well. You know, this is not something we are taking lying down, and we've been extremely vocal in our opposition to what are very short-sighted cuts that will impact both on the adoption of walking and cycling in England, but also will obviously have a wider impact on our physical health and mental health, the health of our high streets, and our ability to meet our net zero goals as well. We wrote as the Walking and Cycling Alliance to the Prime Minister last week, and it has been fantastic to get the support of a number of other organisations as part of that. We're also doing a lot of parliamentary engagement and engagement with combined authority mayors and other local authorities, just to ensure that the government hears loud and clear that there is support for walking and cycling, and that walking and cycling has an essential place to play in the UK going forward. So we're going to continue pushing that, and you know, I'm sure all of you are pushing it as well, but I'd encourage as many people as possible to kind of write to their own MPs or kind of ensure that the government hears loud and clear that these cuts are short-sighted and will be counterproductive, and kind of compromise its ability to meet its own kind of funding, its own targets completely. So those were the main points I wanted to make, but really happy to answer any questions or kind of have discussion basically on where we need to go next.
Thank you, Stephen. I thought that covered, you know, the kind of big picture, but also your views on where things are at the moment really well. And we'll open up to the floor in a minute. I'm going to start with a couple of questions, picking up on what you've said there, and some of this we've chatted about previously. But in terms of Living Streets' role as a, you know, that on that side of kind of campaigning, if you like, and holding the government to account and pushing further as part of the Walking and Cycling Alliance, how easy / hard is that for you to do, given the funding that you rely on from the government? And how do you kind of balance that? And are you looking for ways that you can be freer of the government in terms of your funding so that you can take a harder line, or how do you see that?
We've not been slow on this occasion, or indeed on previous occasions, to be critical of government when they do things that we think endanger the ability to make progress on walking and cycling in the UK. And I think there are countless examples of that. I think the reason to we are looking actively at diversifying our income base as well, though, and a number of different things that we're looking at in that regard. So yes, you know, it's something we're really keen on, but we are also never slow in our criticism of government when we need to be. I think the evidence of the last few weeks kind of shows that. And
I think most of us will probably, or many of us will be familiar perhaps with the kind of public facing of your campaigning, in terms of, you know, someone's posted in the chat about the petition they've signed, and you know, you do have a visible presence, and your website's clearly in that space. What can you say about what you do more behind the scenes, and what's the sort of tactics for Living Streets in terms of targeted lobbying and building that political will? How do you go about that? How much can you tell us about?
Well, there's a few different things. I think, first of all, it is absolutely, walking and cycling is something that impacts on a number of different government portfolios. So on a regular basis, we are talking to, obviously talking to MPs across the length and breadth of the UK, but also just getting that message out there to a wide number of government departments that it is essential they pull together in the same direction to influence walking and cycling. So it's about kind of getting that health message across to the Department of Health and ensuring they're directing resources appropriately. It's getting the message across to the Department of Levelling Up in communities, whatever it's called these days. It's ensuring the DFT is moving in the right direction, but it's also ensuring that highways, national highways, are kind of moving in the right direction as well. So we do a lot of work behind closed doors to talk to government stakeholders across the whole of the government machine to ensure that everyone is aware of the benefits of walking and cycling and is pushing in the right direction. Does that answer the question? Was there a second
thank you.
Question I missed?
No, it does, and I'm sure there's loads we could ask, but I'll finish on that. I'll finish with this question for me about pavement parking. We heard Jessie Norman was on a webinar in January talking about pavement parking and saying that they hadn't put the result out of the consultation yet because they wanted to see what the legislative options were first. And then last week, Afzal Khan MP asked the question in the House. I've posted the write-up in Hansard in the chat, and Richard Holden, the Undersecretary for Transport, as you say, there wasn't any great announcement coming soon, but he did speak, I thought, quite interestingly about talking about interim measures. And I wondered if you knew any more about that, and whether that will just be some, you know, it sounded like possibly speeding up the temporary traffic order process might be some sort of sock they'll throw out. I wondered if you had any more insights on that, and why you said in your talk that you were not very optimistic about any sort of national ban.
So the original consultation paper had 3 options in for taking action on pavement parking. One was a nationwide ban, which would require legislation. 2 was I suppose, relaxation of some of the processes around TROs, which you just referenced. alongside a decriminalisation of pavement parkings to give local authorities more power to act. And then the third was a combination of the two. Our preference has always been for a nationwide ban. I think a nationwide ban on pavement parking provides drivers with the clarity that pavement parking is unacceptable as something to do, but is allowed in certain places, rather than the position we have at the moment, where outside of London there's few areas where TROs are in place. We've got a free-for-all and you can park on the pavement wherever you want. I was hopeful about 12 months ago that we would move forward with that, simply because we had a legislative vehicle in the transport bill. The transport bill is, as you probably know, going to look at regulation of e-scooters and look at a few other things as well. But the government announced a few months back that that transport bill was postponed indefinitely. So we've removed the legislative option, does not exist anymore. So as a result, I think what we're more likely to see, which is in line with the comments Richard Holden made, and in line with the parliamentary debate you mentioned, is a relaxation of TROs in the short term. Now that will move us forward, but it lacks the clarity of that nationwide ban that we want to see.
Thank you.
Long-winded answer, but hopefully that gets the point.
No, it's clearly a complex area. Right, I'm going to ask two questions from the chat now, and then I'll go to questions with the hands up. So somebody's asked, is it possible to, in terms of this point about pavements being for people and this encroaching, is it possible, would Living Streets back a position where a kind of section of the pavement of the road and the pavement was set aside for all the services that need to run, because it seems like, you know, everything just gets dug up willy-nilly. So is there a need for more regulation on that?
There is a need to look at digging up the carriageway before you kind of encroach on the pavement as a first case. I think prioritise people over vehicles, I think, is always our number one principle. A great example of that is looking at EV charging points. Our line has always consistently been EV charging points should go either on the carriageway or in dugouts on the carriageway, rather than on the pavement, kind of taking away space from people walking. The other thing that we're not overly keen on is electric vehicle charging cables coming from people's houses over the pavement. When I say overly keen, that's an exaggeration. We don't like it at all. And what I don't like is seeing EV charging cables trailing out of lampposts, because, you know, there is a trip hazard there, and there's a hazard for cyclists there as well. So, you know, there are many examples. I think we need to prioritise people over cars. That's the first principle that we always adopt in all of it.
And then a question about your local groups. So yeah. What's your strategy to develop local Living Streets groups, and where there isn't one, what would you recommend people do?
So for those of you who aren't familiar with our local groups, they're very different from local Friends of the Earth groups or Greenpeace groups, in that they are independent and kind of, I suppose, they have our brand, they use our brand, and we give them expertise, and we have a weekly drop-in session with them to fill them in on campaigning techniques and the kind of things that we're looking at as national priorities. But a local group is generally free to campaign on the local priorities that it sees within its community. And that's driven by our belief that it's local people that understand their communities best, not us. The way they're formed is they're kind of self-forming at the moment. So in a way, if you want to set up a local group, get in touch with our team at Living Streets, and they can provide the support and the kind of backing that you need to get that group moving forward and tell you what you need to do. So we're very open to forming new groups where they don't exist already. We just need people that are willing to dedicate time to do so.
Thank you. Right, let's go to Adam and then Ruth in the chat. And if we could keep questions to reasonably short, questions rather than statements, that would be great, because we've got another speaker to go to shortly.
I noticed with the active travel funds that there seems to be much of a marketing problem around it just being about cyclists.
Yeah.
But I'm noticing now that much of the pavement or the space improvements are usually done in the pavement space, but that doesn't seem to be being pushed. Is that something that needs to be emphasized more from an accessibility point of view? It seems to be one of the only funds in the UK which is actually dealing with accessibility issues generally on pavements. Is there a way to really start making that much more pronounced as an issue or a solution?
I take your point. I think you're right. If you read the ATF4 guidance, it still does sound very cycling dominated. But I think if you read the accompanying press release to ATF4, it does talk a lot more about walking and about personal safety on the street. So I think there is sometimes a mismatch between what government wants to see from something and what actually makes it through to the guidance. So you're right, it's something to address in the future to ensure that there is far more of a match going forward.
A question it was a point raised in the chat from Rachel saying, should there be a pavement fund, same as we just heard about the pothole fund? Would you support that?
We would, and our friends at Sustrans have called for a pavement fund as part of their disabled people's inquiry, and that's something we certainly support. The pothole fund, as it happens, is available for pavements as well as kind of the main carriageway, but local authorities don't seem to get that point. So make that message, make sure that gets across to your local authorities, and we push that as well to people that we speak to as well. But that pothole fund is for everything, not just the road.
Very important detail. Ruth.
Hi, Stephen. Thanks. Great.
Hey, Ruth.
Hi, nice to see you. Two things really quickly. One is obviously trees. Much as we love trees and need trees, tree roots in pavements are a huge issue, especially historical trees. I wondered what work you're doing there in rural areas, because although I'm fully mobile, I cycle a lot in rural areas. And yesterday, the Wandle Trail in London, which is a fantastic away from the road place to go, is hopeless for anyone in a wheelchair, Zimmer frame, walking sticks. So in terms of being active, we don't help, as far as I can see, our people who have mobility issues to stay active without a car and enjoy nature at the same time. And I just wondered how much work you're able to do on that, given that you do so much on other things.
Yeah.
Oh, and very quickly about the fact that people object to tarmacization in the countryside, which in rural Holland is well used because it means people can be active 365 days of the year.
Yeah, you're right. We have limited resources, and kind of a lot of our work tends to focus in on town and city environments. But we work closely with the Ramblers and work closely with other partners to ensure that we can have an influence on the rural environment as well. The inaccessibility of kind of some rural walking routes is just appalling. I don't know the route you were mentioning, but I walked the London Loop between kind of around Barnet, where I live, last year, and it was appalling. It was inaccessible for me, let alone for someone in a wheelchair. So it's an area where we need lots of investment and lots of focus going forward.
Thank you. Right, well, I will say thank you, and we'll leave that part of our session now and say thank you to you, Stephen. If you're able to stay with us for a little bit longer, there's lots going on in the chat. If you feel like reading it and answering any comments there, then that would be really helpful.
Yeah, really happy for anyone to drop me an email afterwards if they want it as well.
Brilliant. And Living Streets conference on Thursday,
Yeah.
Still got online tickets available, I think.
Yeah, available on our website, and very low priced as well. So go ahead and look for them. Hopefully you can join us online.
Thank you. Right, thank you, Stephen. We will now move to Carolyn from Possible, who I misrepresented at the start of the session. She is indeed going to be talking about a much broader set of car-free campaigning, and I'm sorry, I was reading some old notes, so apologies, Carolyn. Over to you.
No problem at all. Good evening, everybody. Yeah, I'm Carolyn. I'm Car-Free London campaigner at Possible. I'm also the founder of Joyriders, women's cycling organisation, and I'm a trustee for Cycle Sisters. But I'm here with my Possible hat on today, and I'm going to tell you a bit about our Car-Free Visions campaign. Let's go into slideshow mode. So this is part of the Car-Free Cities campaign, which you might know about, which we've been running at Possible for the last couple of years. So what we wanted to really do was sort of visually articulate what it is that we're campaigning for, and you know, create these bold visions, working with local communities to sort of try and accelerate the whole process of change that we're all working towards. So the aims of the campaign were to bring these robust, compelling visions for each of our 4 cities into the public consciousness. That's Leeds, London, Bristol and Birmingham. We've also got New York and Paris as part of our Car-Free Megacities sort of sister programme. We wanted people to feel more positively invested in the transition to car-free cities through reimagining their neighbourhoods. And then we had events where we launched the visions, where we were targeting sort of council leaders and cabinet members for transport to also increase their engagement with and their focus on the transition to car-free cities. So the research question that we worked up with Fair City, the think tank, who supported us with our report, was how can we ensure that our cities look, feel and operate equitably in a post-car dependent future? So equity and sort of inclusion at the heart of everything that we do at Possible. So in terms of the campaign activities, we started with a literature review. We interviewed a number of experts in each city, and Fair City then produced a report with findings and recommendations that came out of those interviews. And we then did the community design workshops in 4 areas in each of our cities. And then our architectural visualizer created designs with input from the workshops. And then we launched those visions across the 4 cities with the events that I mentioned and billboard campaigns, and obviously across social media. So these are the experts that I interviewed in London. Isabel Clements in particular was involved at every stage of the project, because she also input into facilitating the workshops and spoke on the panel at the launch event. Those are the experts from Bristol. We don't have their names on there, but you might recognise some of them. That's the report that's on our website. I'll tell you a little bit about the workshops. So we specifically targeted people who were underrepresented in this kind of work and in the climate movement. So people from Black and ethnic minorities, disabled people, working class people, parents and carers. And they were in Handsworth in Birmingham, Beeston, in Leeds, Chelsea Road in Bristol, and Tooting for the London one. Yeah, so just a little bit of a snapshot of the kind of work that we did in those workshops. They were broadly lay people that attended the workshops that didn't really know anything about this agenda previously. We paid them all a fee for their time, and we, taught them about principles of equitable cities and transport planning, different definitions around car dependency and post-car dependency, and what does a car-free city look like, the hierarchy of travel, the whole reason why we need to reduce traffic in our cities and move away from car dependency. We looked at, each person's relationship to the area and their experiences. We had a nice presentation about 5 golden rules for a happy city from Akwesi, our transport planner. And with the Tooting one, Isabel gave us a great presentation about equitable design principles. And she also took us on a tour through the junction without the hand cycle attached to the wheelchair, so that people could see what it's like for a wheelchair user, which was really eye-opening for all of our participants. And then we sort of looked at, inspiration from different cities around the world that have prioritised people over cars in their design. We had really good feedback from the workshops. They were really successful in terms of engaging people from a broad range of different communities, and involving new people in climate action. That was all really positive. So a little bit about the Tooting one. I'm sure a lot of you know, if you know London, that Tooting is a particularly dangerous junction, with all sorts of issues with fatalities. But what was really interesting, in particular with the Tooting one, is that everybody wanted to see more community space, because there's no kind of town square or gathering space. The pavements are really narrow. It's it's a nightmare really, and it was that desire for a community space that came out in our design. I'm not going to show you the designs for all of the cities because I think that would take too long. Let me just move this so I can see a bit better. But this is the one that we came up with for Tooting. Actually, perhaps, can I? Oh no, maybe it's too difficult to do that. I was going to show you the web page, but maybe I'll try and do that at the end. We've got a nice slider on the web page where you can kind of move back and forth between the existing picture of how it is now and the new vision. And we've also got a narrative that goes alongside each vision, which sort of, sets the scene. So mine is about, a mother and her children cycling on their way back from school and stopping off here at the community square where there's a little free library and, musicians performing. So yeah, the community square was a really big part of this one. We've got a nurse here who's cycling on his way home from working at St George's Hospital. Yeah, so it just sort of tries to set the scene of how different it would be. And one of the things we included was having lift access down to the platforms at Tooting Broadway station, so that disabled people can actually use the station, which they can't at the moment. For each of the visions, we also had a kind of bird's eye map like this. We've also got the ideal residential street. So this one, I might have done it backwards. Yeah, okay. So the ideal residential street is not based on a particular place. It's a sort of generic one where we're just trying to show, a typical street that's dominated by cars and how different it is, how different it could be if we remove the cars. And as with everything we do in the Car Free Cities campaign, we do caveat that with, we're talking about, vastly reduced car use, moving away from private car ownership, but obviously allowing for the fact that some people will still need to use their cars for certain journeys. So all of these visions would include things like, car club vehicle that people on the street could use. We've got here scooters, obviously increased cycle storage and all the things that you would expect to see. And this is the Hyde Park Corner one. So this was done as a workshop with people in Westminster. That's Hyde Park Corner as it is now, and that's the vision that the participants came up with. And then the showcase events that we had, which were earlier this year, we involved the participants who came and spoke about their experiences. They were slightly different formats. Some of the workshops were more kind of informal, with people actually doing kind of more workshops and brainstorming things and feeding back on the visions at the events. We had the Tooting one, we had a panel with local councillors, and we had Isabel speaking again, and a person representing local businesses. In terms of the impact of the project, there's a little bit there from some of the impact. Hilary Benn came along to the one in Leeds. In Tooting, there are local groups that want to campaign for change there, because there was basically Transport for London, had a plan for Tooting that got shelved due to COVID. And there was meant to be £10 million worth of investment happening there with a whole pedestrian town centre action plan. So they're hoping to use these to campaign for something to actually happen down there. A little bit of the press highlights. few things there. We had the front page of the Yorkshire Evening Post. We had a nice interview on BBC Radio West Midlands. And then these are the billboards in each of the 4 cities. That's the one in Grove Lane in Handsworth with the participants. That's the one in Bristol, the Newfoundland Circus. That's the Tooting one. This is the one for one of the ones for Leeds. So sorry, I should have said in each city we had a kind of iconic city centre location that we redesigned, and then also a more local kind of neighbourhood street, which is the ones that the workshop participants input into. And then one of our calls to action from the project, we've got 10 measures to bring the visions to life. I think they're slightly different in each city, but they'll all be things that I'm sure you're all already campaigning on and aware of. And we have a right to counsellor tool on our website that people can use that helps them to send a letter to their local councillor asking for the kind of changes that would help to make visions like this a reality. Okay, that brings me to the end. I'm happy to take any questions, or I could have a go at showing you the website. Maybe it's best if I just put the link in the chat and you can have a little look around afterwards. But the slider is really good. Check out the slider.
I think so, yeah. Carolyn, put the link in the chat. People can play with that while we do questions at the same time. And if you pop your screen share down, then we can see you. If you just stop sharing.
Yeah, got it.
There we go. And I'll just put you in the spotlight. So in terms of the goal of the campaign, presumably it was to, you know, actually create a fantastic debate about what spaces should be for and what they could be. What would you see as the kind of successes? You know, could you give us any little examples of how what the campaign has achieved as far, and it might be early days, but
I think it is early days in the sense of, you know, there's still a lot more that we need to do now that we've launched the visions. It ended up being such a rush and quite complex doing it across 4 different cities. So we really need to do a bit more with the remaining months of the Car-Free Cities campaign, because the overall campaign finishes at the end of June. So we've got a wrap-up finale event in June that will be for local councillors, councillors maybe that are hoping to get elected and that would like to understand more about this issue and understand how to kind of make progress on this issue and deal with some of the pushback that they might get from their constituents. But we've had about 17,000 hits on the web page. We'd like to see more use of the right to counsellor tool. But I think the main impact has really been in those local areas in terms of working with those local residents who were all outside the kind of green bubble, and how much they got out of it. And also the broader impact in terms of them going back and spreading the word in their communities. So, for example, the Birmingham participants have also been involved in a bigger campaign called Bump into Brum, which is a campaign on buses with the ACT Climate Lab promoting active travel in Birmingham. But that's been a really good thing for us in terms of reaching out to different communities and getting them really involved at the grassroots level in reimagining what their cities could be like. They're just disappointed because they want it all, you know, they all want it to happen now.
Yeah, I mean, it was really interesting hearing you talk through the process that you adopted and how much care and time and therefore money was taken to ensure that you were speaking to diverse peoples and perspectives. And do you feel that you got a kind of different result because of that? Obviously these are all local, so they'll all be different depending on where they are, but how do you think that changed what your outputs were?
It depends what you, I mean, different from if we'd worked with people who were already campaigners?
Well, I guess you spelt out at the beginning how you really intentionally sought out people from diverse groups, not the usual suspects, and I wondered if you felt how that affected what the end results were.
I think it showed that people from all communities want to see change. And we had a really broad range. I mean, people wanted all kinds of things, you know, cable cars. I mean, the Tooting one, there's a rooftop garden on top of the tube station. They wanted water fountains. you know, but it certainly helped in terms of the equity angle, because we looked at, you know, we looked at gender, we looked at race, we looked at class, we looked at, you know, how safe does this space feel? Would you feel safe using this space at night? Would you feel safe if you were a member of this particular group? And with the Tooting one, I really tried to sort of centre the needs of disabled people as a way of trying to deflect, you know, negative criticism about the whole sort of healthy streets and car-free agenda, which is why it was really great having Isabel involved at every stage. So, but a good sort of learning with the Tooting one was that the event was picked up and shared around all the sort of local groups, and we had a lot of people booking that were obviously skeptics, and they were registering for the event and leaving questions that were really more like, you know, were criticisms, and then they didn't, and for the most part those people didn't show up to, you know, to the actual event, which is a shame, because I'd really kind of pitched my slides to try and, you know, convert them and bring them on board.
Yeah. Bit of chat across the session today about active travel as a phrase which crops up a lot. Did that phrase get used at all in any of your sessions, or was this you trying to speak more about place? And
yeah, I think there was a lot more focus on place. I mean, we might have talked about active travel, and we had to take the participants through a journey of explaining, you know, why we need to reduce car use in the first place. So in London, we were looking at the Mayor's transport strategy, net zero, you know, the fact that we need to reduce traffic by 27% minimum, and it's only reduced by around 1% in the last few years. So yeah, we had to sort of take them through. It was like a bit of a crash course, really. So yeah, I think we did use the phrase active travel once they'd sort of come to understand, you know, what that means.
Right, quick few questions from the chat then. One question from Tim was, do you have a handbook for running those community sessions? You know, do you have a sort of how to?
That's a really good question. We could certainly share the slides that we used in the different workshops, which will, you know, they will vary a little bit across the different cities, just from the natures of the 4 different campaigners working in different locations and having slightly different skill sets. But yeah, I'd be quite happy, you know, to share those, and it would be great to see people running a similar thing in their own areas. I mean, obviously we had a architectural visualizer with really great skills as part of our team. Yeah, which
that would be great if you, I mean, if you email them to us, Carolyn, we can put them up on our website, or if you put them up on yours, we can link to that. Another question in the chat, from Adam, what is the roadmap that towns and cities should be following in terms of a strategy that's focusing on tackling private car ownership in urban areas?
What is the roadmap? That's a really good question. I mean, I think, you know, we're all working towards basically just trying to get politicians on board and accelerate this whole process of change. So in London, you know, it's looking at the Mayor's transport strategy and the net zero strategy, which of course, you know, the Mayor's transport strategy is not yet fully up to date with the net zero strategy. And I think the report is really useful, actually. The report from Fair City might be helpful in terms of a roadmap, because there's some quite good insights there. I would say for the London one in particular, the interview with Rafe Smith, that's just got a really good summary around all the different things that we need to be looking at. So the report focused on 3 themes: city governance, city infrastructure, and city identities. So it was also looking at things like how the move to car-free cities could actually kind of enhance and contribute to the specific identities of those 4 cities.
Oh, yes, that does sound interesting. On that roadmap point, I mean, the very clear kind of political rhetoric that we're hearing locally in Manchester is politicians saying that, you know, ultimately there has to be alternatives for people before, you can really ask them to stop using a car. So would that fit with what the feedback is that you got from the sessions that you ran with these community groups?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you know, like we've got a bus campaign starting, for example, for trying to bring the buses back under public control in Birmingham. You know, people do need alternatives, and I think that's where a lot of the resentment comes from, because, you know, public transport's not good enough, cycling infrastructure is not good enough. So that's why, you know, people find it a lot harder to you know, leave their cars behind or move away from their car use.
Right, one more question from the chat, which, if Stephen, if you're still here, it'd be good to get your answer to this as well, which is, do either of your organisations, do you see yourselves as having a role in feeding back on consultations and spotting planning applications and making, you know, objections? Are you involved in the process in that, or do you see your organisation's role as not that, and that's up to other people?
If I can just answer that first. So that's I mean, as possible, we will sometimes, you know, we're part of the Healthy Streets Scorecard Coalition in London and the Clean Cities Healthy Air Coalition. So we might sometimes do open letters that we sign as part of those coalitions. But for the most part, our work is about positive climate action, comms-led work. And we're often so busy just trying to kind of like deliver those projects that it's yeah, I suppose it's slightly outside of our remit. Having said that, we would input too. We've done things like we created a tool to help people participate in the ULEZ consultation, and we had thousands of people using that. So we're more likely to kind of create comms outputs that would help other people to participate in those consultations, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Thank you, Carolyn. And if there's anything, any links or anything you'd like to put in the chat before we finish, and I'll just come in over to Stephen, whether you have anything to say on that question.
Yeah, so our local groups are actively engaged in planning decisions on a local level, as you would expect, but on a wider level, Living Streets will express a view on occasion, but our main focus is on the wider policy framework. So we are part of the Better Planning Coalition that's looking to embed walking and cycling into the Levelling Up Bill. And we're also part of a separate coalition that's fed back views on the MPPF and on some of the Levelling Up Bill regulations. So we're kind of actively involved at the high level and at the on a day-to-day level as well.
Thank you. Okay, well, I think unless anyone else has any last questions, or if I've missed any in the chat, Roxanne, give me a nudge now. Okay, so I will, in that case, bring this week's session to a close. Thanks to our guests, Stephen and Carolyn, for joining us. We've got one more session before Easter. So next week, we're hearing from John Winder on the history of playgrounds, quite a very interesting topic on how children have over the years effectively been excluded from public spaces and put into playgrounds to keep them out of the way of cars, basically. So do join us for that one. And then we have a break for Easter, and then we've got two fantastic speakers for the first week back after Easter, which is the 18th of April. We've got Scott Arthur from Edinburgh, where the councillor behind Big Vision for Edinburgh, embracing restricting traffic and other measures, and also Glenn Lyons from Mott MacDonald, and also the University of West England, very interesting academic and practitioner. So thank you for joining us, everyone, and we will, as ever, have this session up on our website and put the links and the slides that were shared from Carolyn, they'll go up on our website as well. Thank you for joining us. See you next time.
Thanks.
Good reminder, Adam, with a new Zoom link. Look out for that in your inbox.